Sometimes horror films decide to defy the expected outcome and let their most unlikable characters get off light, leaving the audience wishing something much, much worse happened to them. Whatever the reason, these horror movie characters all ended their movie without receiving a sufficiently gnarly comeuppance for their obnoxious, criminal, and downright nauseating conduct. So let's take a look at them. I'm Adam, this is What Culture Horror, and here are 10 horror movie characters who got off too easy. Number 10. Edward Jones, The Purge election year. One of the primary villains in the third Purge film is Edward Jones, a minister and presidential candidate for far-right policy party, the New Founding Fathers of America. Even for the low standards of the NFAA's racist, hateful membership, Owens is a real piece of work, alright. Not only plotting to have his political rival Charlene Roan assassinated, but annually holding a grim midnight mass on Purge night where he sacrificially slaughters innocents. He's a maniacal religious zealot, and so it sure as hell seemed like he was going to get his brutal comeuppance at film's end. But not really. Though most of Owens' congregation are killed in election year's climax, Owens himself is spared when Roan insists that he stays alive so that she can beat him in an election. How noble. And while that's ultimately what happens, with Roan winning the election in a landslide, Owens never sees any tangible physical punishment for his many crimes, and hasn't been seen in the series since. Number 9. Frank Barbarian. The real villain of Barbarian isn't the mutant mother pursuing Tess and AJ, but rather the original owner of the house they're trapped within, Frank. Flashbacks eventually reveal Frank has spent decades kidnapping women, forcefully impregnating them, and creating a fleet of incestual mutant children, one of whom is assumed to be the mother. Late in the film, AJ stumbles upon a decrepit, bedridden Frank in a secret room in the bowels of the house, and though AJ initially believes him to be another victim of the mother, he soon enough finds videotapes confirming this is not the case. Realizing that his jig is finally up, Frank suddenly pulls out a gun and shoots himself dead. But for someone who spends decades committing horrendous abuse, this was the easy way out. Unlike his victims, Frank had the luxury of determining his own end, rather than spending what remained of his life in a jail cell. Number 8. Luke Lerner, Better Watch Out. Better Watch Out's surprise villain is 12-year-old Luke Lerner, who stages a home invasion scenario in an attempt to win the affection of his babysitter Ashley by pretending to rescue her. Once the ruse is revealed, however, Luke truly lets his mask slip and shows how much of a flagrant psychopath he really is, tying Ashley up, killing her boyfriend and ex-boyfriend, and also his own eventually reluctant accomplice Garrett. Luke's plan concludes with him stabbing Ashley, framing her ex for all the deaths, and then going to bed. His parents call the police upon returning home, and though Ashley is ultimately revealed to have survived her injuries, it's left ambiguous as to whether Luke is ever caught. While on one hand, Ashley will almost certainly tell the authorities about Luke's actions, the mid-credits scene suggests that Luke's going to visit the hospital and attempt to kill her. Either way, regardless of that off-screen outcome, given how utterly detestable Luke has shown to be throughout the film, it sure was a shame we didn't get to see him die a horribly over-the-top death at Ashley's hands. Number 7. Norman Nordstrom, Don't Breathe 2. A sequel to Don't Breathe was certainly a tricky prospect. That Norman Nordstrom, the blind man who fought off 3 young thieves who broke into his house, had forcefully impregnated the woman who killed his daughter in a car accident, in a twisted attempt to create a replacement for said daughter. Don't Breathe 2 presents Norman as something of an anti-hero, the lesser of two evils when his adopted daughter Phoenix is targeted by her meth kook father, Raylan. By film's end, Raylan is killed and Phoenix's life saved, though Norman's efforts leave him apparently mortally wounded, allowing him to die peacefully in Phoenix's arms, believing that she brought him the salvation he sought for his past crimes. And even though that forced catharsis for Norman rings rather false given the horrendous nature of his prior acts, the film doesn't even commit to that either, as the mid-credits scene implies that he in fact survived. With a third film currently in development, it'll be interesting to see how the filmmakers try to further twist Norman's characterization in a sympathetic light. He definitely needs to die this time, right? Number 6. Rose the Hat, Dr. Sleep. Dr. Sleep's big bad is Rose the Hat, the leader of a cult of psychic vampires called the True Knot, who extend their own lifespans by killing those who possess the Shining and consuming their steam. Rose is shown to be an extremely powerful psychic throughout the film, directly responsible for the deaths of numerous characters and indirectly authorizing the killing of many more. And though she does perish in the film's climax, Danny Torrance gets her to the Overlook Hotel and unleashes the hotel's ghosts upon her. It's ultimately all over a little quickly unlikely given the amount of suffering and death she's shown to have caused in the time span of the movie alone. Rose gets to endure about 20 seconds of agony as the ghosts devour her, but it doesn't feel nearly commensurate to everything she's dealt out throughout her life, most of which we don't even know about. Having Rose be sealed away in the Overlook and tormented for years, decades, even centuries would have been a far more fitting demise, rather than this disappointingly expedient end. And while I have you guys, make sure you let us know down in the comments which horror movie character you think got off way too easy. You know, the one who deserved a really nasty death and just got away scot-free? Make sure you let us know, and while you're there, make sure you give us a like and a subscribe. Alright, now back to the list. Number 5. The Parents Trick or Treat. Surely the most disturbing story in cult horror anthology Trick or Treat is the Halloween School Bus Massacre. It tells an urban legend where the parents of 8 mentally disabled children, having grown tired of caring for them, paid a bus driver to kill them. The plan didn't go quite as expected, though nevertheless culminated in the kids drowning when the bus was driven off a cliff while the driver disappeared into the night. And though the film ends with the ghosts of the children returning to tear apart the now aged bus driver, Mr. Krieg, their parents appear to get away scot-free. Now it's worth considering that we simply don't see what happens next, and the parents could very well be the ghost's next target. Yet the movie itself makes no implication of that whatsoever. Above all else, we absolutely don't get to see it and relish in it, even if it does happen. To do something so cruel and then apparently go unpunished for it forevermore is hugely frustrating. Number 4. Dr. Cruz, Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood. Friday the 13th Part 7's Dr. Cruz may not be a mask-wearing mass murderer, but he's nevertheless the film's secondary antagonist. Cruz is the psychiatrist to protagonist Tina Shepard, who shamelessly attempts to exploit her telekinetic abilities for his own gain. He's also a natural coward, as is made shockingly clear near the end of the movie when he uses Tina's mother Amanda as a human shield, resulting in her being killed by Jason with an axe. Now, to be clear, it only ends up buying Cruz a few seconds of extra life, as he soon enough knocked over by Jason and fatally stabbed in the chest with a branch saw. But it's just too quick a damn death for someone who brutally exploited a traumatized minor and straight up threw somebody else to the wolves in an attempt to save himself. It doesn't help that Cruz's death, like most of the other deaths in the movie, was cut to ribbons to satisfy the MPAA, ensuring that the audience can't even take much satisfaction in him being brutally killed by Jason. Number 3. Annie Dashcam. In many respects, the entire purpose of Rob Savage's provocative film Dashcam was to test whether or not the audience could be persuaded to root for an extremely unlikable character. The protagonist in this case is Annie, an overbearing right-wing internet personality whose toxic opinions on the pandemic and politics are clearly primed to anger the audience. But given that the most common complaint about the found footage film is that Annie is just too unlikable for her own good, many would argue that it simply became impossible to root for her to survive against the increasingly supernatural phenomena pursuing her. But indeed, Annie does triumph over her aggressors and survive the wild night, ultimately leaving many disappointed who hoped that this awful person, who's shown no signs of growth, would end up being killed off in the final scene, as is basically tradition for the found footage genre. In line with the film's overall mission to skirt expectations though, this utterly detestable protagonist lives to be pure human trash for another day. Number 2. Bobby Dagan, Saw 3D The Final Chapter. Though the Saw franchise has a tendency to give its most despicable characters their just desserts in the end, there's one all-timer a-hole who ended up getting off pretty damn light, all things considered. That is Saw 3D's Bobby Dagan, a self-help guru who amassed wealth and fame by lying about being a Jigsaw survivor, and so unsurprisingly ends up in one of his traps for realsies. Despite Bobby seeming ripe for a brutal death scene by film's end, he actually survives, yet fails to save any of his co-conspirators forced to participate in the games with him. Bobby's punishment instead is that he has to witness his poor wife, Joyce, who is implied to have no knowledge of his duplicity, get roasted to death. Sure, seeing your wife perish is undeniably traumatic, and Bobby's reputation is also clearly ruined, but given that he himself is left with only superficial injuries, it's not nearly damning enough an outcome for someone who exploited Jigsaw's rampage for his own gain. Number 1. Psyche Climax. This wildly experimental horror film climax follows a French dance troupe whose after party takes a nasty turn when the communal sangria bowl is spiked with LSD, causing mass mayhem. As the dancers grow increasingly agitated and frustrated with one another, numerous deaths are caused. One member of the group is locked out of the dance hall and freezes to death. A pregnant woman is assaulted and possibly miscarries. A young boy is fatally electrocuted, and his grief-stricken mother kills herself in response. The ending reveals that the sangria was spiked by one of the group, Psyche, who suffered no ill effects from the LSD, while there's also no clear indication that her guilt will ever be discovered. And even if the police do discover the drug in her bag, at least she made it through the night in one piece, which is pretty good going, all things considered.